There's a moment in every ruler's life when the weight of the crown feels heavier than gold, when the choices they make ripple far beyond the throne room and into the hearts of their people. Tonight, we step into one of those pivotal moments with Tar-Amandil, the third King of Númenor, as he stands atop the tower of the setting sun, the sea breeze carrying whispers of both duty and desire. Can you feel it? The tension between what must be done and what the heart yearns for. It's a struggle as old as time itself, and tonight we'll walk alongside him as he faces it. But first, we'd love to know, where are you listening from right now, and what hour has settled over your corner of the world? Let us know in the comments below, because every story feels richer when shared. The island of Nmenor gleams like a jewel beneath the stars, a kingdom blessed by the gods yet shadowed by the unattainable. Tar-Amandil, young and untested, gazes westward, where the undying lands shimmer just beyond the horizon, a place of eternal grace, forever out of reach for mortals like him. The Eldar, the immortal elves, call to something deep within his spirit, a longing he can't quiet. Yet even as his heart tugs him toward dreams of forever, the reality of kingship tugs him back. The eastern colonies, restless and simmering with discontent, demand his attention. The crown isn't just a symbol, it's a responsibility, one that leaves no room for hesitation. And then, the messenger arrives. Footsteps echo on the tower stairs, urgent and unrelenting. The news they carry will force Tar-Amandil to make his first true decision as king, a choice that will echo through the annals of Númenor's history. Will he turn toward the whispers of the unseen, or will he plant his feet firmly in the soil of his kingdom? This is where legends are born, in the quiet moments before the storm. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the waves of this tale carry you away. The story of Tar-Amandil is about to unfold, and it's one you won't want to miss. The council chamber hums with tension as Tar-Amandil takes his seat at the head of the long marble table. The flickering torchlight casts shadows that dance across the faces of his advisors, some weathered by decades of service, others sharp-eyed and hungry to prove themselves. To his right, Lord Halakar leans forward, his voice low but insistent. The eastern colonies do not respond to honeyed words, my king. They respect strength. Send the fleet, and let them remember the power of Númenor's arm. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the room, but Lady Almiel, her silver hair braided with pearls, raises a hand. And what if force only fans the flames? Every life lost in battle is a seed of future rebellion. Let us send envoys bearing gifts, not swords, and show them the generosity of the crown. Tar-Amandil's fingers trace the edge of his father's scepter, still cool to the touch. He remembers the old king's words: a ruler who draws his sword too soon will never know the strength of patience. But the weight of expectation is a cloak that never loosens. The military commanders shift impatiently, their armor clinking like a quiet challenge. Captain Barahir, his scarred face unreadable, locks eyes with the young king. Delay will be seen as weakness. The colonies smell hesitation like blood in the water. For a heartbeat, the room holds its breath. Tar-Amandil closes his eyes, listening to the distant crash of waves against the harbor walls, a rhythm older than kings, older than empires. When he speaks, his voice is steady. We will send the envoys. Let them carry not just promises, but the sight of our fleets anchored just beyond the horizon. We offer peace first, but let there be no doubt, Númenor does not bargain from fear. The words settle like a stone dropped into still water. Some nod, others exchange glances heavy with unspoken doubt. But the decision is made. As the council disperses, Tar-Amandil lingers, watching the last of the torches gutter in their sconces. The path ahead is fragile as spun glass, and he knows this choice will define him, not just to his people, but to history. Will they remember him as the king who averted war, or the one who faltered when the storm came? The answer lies beyond the sea, where the Envoys' ships will soon vanish into the dawn. The sea winds howl through the palace corridors like a warning as the Envoys stagger into the throne room, their robes stained with dust and their eyes hollow with exhaustion. The oldest among them, Lord Tar-Amandil, kneels before Tar-Amandil, his voice cracking. They burned our gifts, my king, spat upon our words. The rebel leader, a firebrand named Ulbar, has crowned himself king of the east. His followers already raid our outposts along the coast. A murmur of outrage ripples through the court, but Tar-Amandil remains still, his grip tightening on the armrests of the throne. The scent of salt and smoke clings to the Envoys, a bitter reminder of the failure of patience. That night, the young king walks alone through the vaulted hall of lore, where the histories of Númenor stretch back in scrolls of faded ink and parchment, brittle with age. The lamplight flickers over a single phrase in an ancient chronicle, nearly swallowed by the margins. In the days of Tar-Amandil, the eastern hills bowed not to force, but to the oath sworn beneath the white tree. His breath catches. The white tree, the symbol of Númenor's first alliance. A pact, sealed not with blades, but with shared reverence for the land. Could such a bond still stir the hearts of Ulbar's people? The scribes whisper that the tree's last sapling still grows in a hidden grove near the rebel stronghold, untouched by time. Dawn finds Tar-Amandil armored not in steel, but in a simple cloak of undyed wool, his only escort a handful of graybeards who remember the old ways. The captain of the guard blocks the harbor stairs, his jaw set. This is madness. Ulbar will slit your throat before you speak a word, but the king meets his gaze, quiet as the tide. Then let my blood water the roots of the white tree, if that's what it takes to remind us all what Númenor was meant to be. The ship's sails snap open against the rising sun, carrying him toward the very heart of the storm, not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a forgotten oath waits to be renewed. The salt-stained merchant's cloak scratches against Tar-Amandil's neck as he trudges along the winding road east, his boots kicking up dust that smells of ash and dried herbs. Beside him, Captain Barahir, now playing the role of a hardened caravan guard, keeps his voice low as they pass a line of hollow-eyed refugees shuffling westward. They flee their own lands, my king. These are your subjects, though they no longer know your face. The weight of those words settles like a stone in Tar-Amandil's chest. A child clutches a singed doll, its embroidered eyes staring blankly from the folds of her mother's ragged shawl. This is the truth the palace scrolls never showed him, the slow unraveling of peace, stitch by stitch. Nightfall finds them in a riverside village where the tavern talk is sharp with bitterness. A farmer spits into the fire, his hands trembling. Ulbar's men took my sons for his glorious army, left my fields to rot. And where was the king's protection? Sailing in circles off the coast, too proud to land, too afraid to fight. Tar-Amandil's fingers tighten around his tankard, the ale suddenly sour on his tongue. He could reveal himself now, demand loyalty in his father's name, but Barahir's boot nudges his under the table, a silent reminder. Crowns have no power here, not when trust has burned to embers. By the third day, the road climbs into the hills, where the rebels have their stronghold. The wind carries the distant clang of hammers on steel Ulbar's forges, working day and night. Yet between the rocky slopes, tucked in a hidden valley, Tar-Amandil spots it, a slender sapling with leaves like pale silver, its roots cradled by a circle of weathered stones. The white tree, a woman kneels beside it, placing offerings of honey and barley. When she sees the strangers, her eyes widen, but not with fear. "You've come," she whispers, as if she'd been waiting. "The tree dreamed of you." Barahir shifts uneasily, hand drifting toward the dagger concealed beneath his tunic. But Tar-Amandil kneels, pressing his palm to the earth where the tree's roots twine deep. The bark hums beneath his touch, a memory older than kingdoms. The woman's voice is soft as the rustling leaves. Ulbar calls himself king, but his people starve while he hoards grain for war. They remember the old oaths, the ones sworn here when the world was young. Dawn paints the eastern sky blood red as Tar-Amandil stands at the valley's edge, gazing down at the rebel camp. The choice crystallizes before him, sharp as broken glass. He could summon the fleet, drown this rebellion in steel and fire, but the child's burned doll lingers in his mind, and the woman's weary hope. Kingship isn't just about power, it's about seeing what others refuse to. The wind carries the scent of the white tree's blossoms, faint but unbroken, as he turns to Barahir. "Ride for the coast. Tell the fleet to hold position. There's a story this land needs to remember before the first sword is drawn." The path to Ulbar's stronghold winds through a narrow pass where the bones of ancient watchtowers litter the cliffs like broken teeth. Barahir's hand never strays far from his sword as they approach the rebel camp, a sprawling maze of tents and cookfires, buzzing with the restless energy of men who have traded plows for pikes. But it's not Ulbar who greets them at the gates. A broad-shouldered figure steps forward, his face crisscrossed with scars earned long before this rebellion began. Barazan, Ulbar's second in command, spits at the ground near Tar-Amandil's feet. "Another beggar from the west, come to lick crumbs from our table." His laughter is sharp as a whetstone on steel, but the king doesn't flinch. With a slow, deliberate motion, Tar-Amandil pulls back his hood. The firelight catches the glint of the royal signet ring on his finger, and the murmurs around them die, as if the wind itself has been stolen. Barazan's axe slips from his shoulder, thudding into the dirt. "You're either the bravest fool in Nmenor," he growls, "or you've got a death wish." The rebels tense, fingers twitching toward blades, but the king meets Barazan's glare without blinking. "I came to see the land my father's law has failed, to hear the grievances no envoy ever carried back to the throne. For a heartbeat, the camp holds its breath." Then Barazan barks a laugh, sharp and mirthless. "Pretty words won't fill our children's bellies, king." He jerks his chin toward the cliffs, where the silhouette of a crumbling tower claws at the moonlit sky. "You want to prove you're more than just a crown. Spend a night in the widow's watch. They say the elves who died there still whisper treason, to anyone fool enough to listen. A challenge, not an execution, but the gleam in Barazan's eyes makes it clear which outcome he expects. The ruins exhale the scent of damp stone and something older, memory, perhaps, or regret. Tar-Amandil climbs the broken stairs alone, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow tower. The rebels' torches below shrink to pinpricks, and the wind carries fragments of their bets. He'll bolt before midnight. Nah, the ghosts will get him first, but the king isn't listening. High in the shattered chamber where elven sentries once kept vigil, he finds the remnants of a mosaic, a white tree, its roots entwined with a crown. The same design that graces his own banners centuries later. Midnight comes with a groan of shifting stone. The whispers begin as sighs between the cracks, words in a tongue no mortal should know. Yet Tar-Amandil understands, not with his ears, but with the blood of his ancestors humming in his veins. The ghosts don't speak of treason, they speak of a broken promise, an oath between elf and man that cracked when Numenor's kings grew proud. A cold hand brushes his shoulder, and for the first time since leaving his palace, he feels the true weight of fear, not of death, but of failure. What if he's already too late to mend what's been shattered? Dawn finds Barazan pacing at the tower's base, his axe balanced across his shoulders. When the king emerges, pale but unharmed, the rebel's scowl deepens. So, the ghost spared you. Tar-Amandil's voice is hoarse, as if he's breathed in centuries of dust. They showed me what happens when kings forget their promises. He extends his hand, palm up, revealing a single silver leaf plucked from the ruins, identical to the one Barazan's grandmother once wore around her neck before the wars began. The rebel's breath catches. Recognition flickers in his eyes, then something softer, older, the first crack in his armor. Somewhere in the camp, a child's laughter rings out, bright and unexpected. Tar-Amandil turns toward the sound, the weight of the night still pressing on his shoulders. The ghosts of the watchtower have given him more than a test. They've given him a choice. Not just how to rule, but why. And as the morning light spills over the rebel camp, he knows Barazan isn't the only one who's been challenged. The whispers coil around Tar-Amandil like mist, threading through the cracks of the broken tower, with voices that haven't spoken in centuries. They aren't words so much as echoes, the last gasps of elven sentries who watched these cliffs when Nmenor was young, when the white tree's roots still bound elf and man together. The air thrums with the memory of steel and splintered shields, the tang of old blood clinging to the stones. A colder voice slithers through the dark, dripping with the honeyed venom of despair. Your line is dust. Your throne, a child's toy. The east will burn, and you will kneel in the ashes. The king's knees buckle under the weight of the vision. Smoke rising from the palace at Armanilos, the great libraries crumbling to charred parchment. But then, a fragment of melody surfaces in the chaos, a thread of light. His grandmother's voice, singing to him when storms rattle the palace windows. Without thinking, Tar-Amandil opens his mouth, and the hymn spills out, rough at first, then stronger. The words are ancient, older than the tower itself, a plea for unity woven into the very bones of Nmenor. By root and crown, by shore and sea, let no shadow divide us. The spectral voices falter, the darkness shudders. Somewhere in the ruins, a single note answers him, clear as starlight, pure as the first dawn. The hymn isn't just a song, it's a key, turning in a lock no rebel's axe could break. Dawn finds Barazan gripping the tower's base, his knuckles white around his axe haft. He expected screams, silence, not this. This light, spilling from the cracks in the mortar like liquid gold. When Tar-Amandil emerges, his cloak is singed at the edges, but his eyes are alive with a fire the rebel has never seen in any king's face. Barazan's throat tightens. "You're either mad," he mutters, "or you've got more of the old blood in you than I thought." The king lifts a hand, and between his fingers glimmers a shard of the mosaic. The white tree, its branches cradling a crown. "They showed me what we forgot," he says softly, "not who ruled, but why." The rebel's jaw works, his pride warring with something deeper. The memory of his grandfather's stories, of a time when the tree's shade meant sanctuary, not surrender. Somewhere behind them, a child darts between the tents, clutching a wooden toy shaped like a ship. Barazan exhales long and slow, then jerks his chin toward Ulbar's tent. "I'll take you to him, but if he smells weakness, he'll feed you to the crows." Tar-Amandil's smile is weary but unshaken. "Then let him taste the steel in my words first." The rebel barks a laugh, sharp but genuine, and for the first time in years, the wind carries something other than the scent of war, the faintest trace of salt and blossoms, drifting from the hidden valley where the white tree waits. The air in Ulbar's war tent is thick with the scent of sweat and stale ale, the flickering lamplight casting jagged shadows across the faces of the rebel leaders. Tar-Amandil stands before them, unarmed, his borrowed cloak still dusty from the road. Ulbar lounges on a makeshift throne of looted Númenorian furniture, his fingers drumming on the hilt of a dagger. "So," he drawls, "the puppy king comes to bark terms at the wolf." Laughter ripples through his men, but Tar-Amandil doesn't flinch. He reaches into his tunic and tosses a worn leather pouch onto the table between them. It spills open, revealing not gold, but grain, the last shriveled harvest from a village starving under Ulbar's levies. "This is what your war feeds on," the king says quietly. Not glory, not freedom, just hunger. Silence crashes down like a hammer. Ulbar's smirk falters as Barazan steps forward, his voice gruff. "We didn't take up arms to watch our children wither." The rebel leader's eyes dart between his second-in-command and the king, sensing the shift in the room. Tar-Amandil presses his advantage. "Keep your lands. Rule them as you see fit, but under Númenor's banner, with seats on my council and a voice in the laws that govern you." A murmur rises, half disbelief, half wary hope. Ulbar slams his fist on the table. "And when your nobles cry treason, when your pretty lords demand our heads," back in Armanilos, the council chamber erupts the moment Tar-Amandil returns with the terms. Lord Halakar's face purples with outrage. "Autonomy, you've handed them the knife to slit our throats." Even Lady Almiel, ever the voice of moderation, clutches her pearls like a shield. "The Eastern lords will revolt if they lose their tariffs. This isn't peace, it's a slow poison." But the king lifts his father's scepter, the weight of it familiar in his grip. "My father once told me that justice is the only glue that holds kingdoms together. Force buys silence, not loyalty." His gaze sweeps the room, lingering on each doubting face. "Or shall we spend the next decade drowning in blood, only to end up here again?" The compromise survives by a thread. one fraying further when the first eastern ships arrive in the capital, their sails patched but flying Numenor's crest. The nobles watch from the quay, their whispers sharp as knives, but then the rebel envoys kneel, not in submission, but in mutual oath, pressing their foreheads to the same stone where Tar-Amandil once swore his pact with the elves. Tar-Amandil offers his hand instead of his foot to stamp their treaty, and something in the gesture, small, human, unlocks the tension. Peace, it turns out, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the fragile space between one breath and the next, where trust begins to grow. In the shadow of the white tree, now transplanted to the palace gardens, the first joint council meets. The debates are fierce, the compromise is bitter, but no one draws steel. And when Ulbar, now lord of the eastern marches, grudgingly admits the royal granaries feed his people better than his raids ever did, even Halakar's scowl softens. Yet as the king walks the moonlit ramparts that night, the wind carries an echo from the watchtower ruins, a whisper only he can hear. You've bought time, little king. But the sea remembers every broken promise. The waves crash against the harbor walls below, relentless as history. Tar-Amandil tightens his cloak against the chill. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the undying lands glow faintly, a reminder that even the wisest rulers are only mortal. And mortals, he's learning, must plant trees they may never sit beneath. The streets of Armanilos erupt in cheers as Tar-Amandil rides through the city gates, petals strewn beneath his horses, hooves like fragments of a rainbow. Children dart forward to touch the hem of his travel-stained cloak, their mothers whispering that the king who faced down rebels without drawing a sword must carry the blessings of the valor themselves. But the nobles lining the balconies above don't join the celebration. Their applause is measured, their smiles thin as parchment. Lord Halakar's voice cuts through the adulation like a blade sheathed in silk. How gracious of our king to spare the traitors. One wonders if they'll return the favor when their knives find our backs. In the solitude of the palace gardens, Tar-Amandil's sister Almerion waits beneath the newly transplanted white tree, her fingers tracing the scar where a sapling was grafted to ancient roots. She doesn't turn when he approaches, but her words are sharp as a honed edge. They're calling it the mercy edict in the taverns. Your nobles prefer the surrender. A nightingale's song twists between them, too bright for the tension, thickening the air. Halakar's faction grows bolder by the day. They say you've traded Numenor's strength for sentimentality, that the Eastern lords will see your kindness as weakness. The king sinks onto the marble bench beside her, the weight of the crown suddenly unbearable. Would they prefer rivers of blood, fields salted with bones? Almerion finally meets his gaze, her eyes reflecting the tree's silver leaves. They prefer a king who makes them feel powerful. You gave Ulbar a seat at the table. Now every noble who's ever grumbled about taxes wonders what they could gain by pushing harder. She presses a folded scrap of parchment into his palm. The seal is broken, the handwriting cramped and frantic. A report from a spy in Halakar's household. Words leap from the page, secret meetings, forged letters, a plot to sway the council by midsummer. Doubt coils in Tar-Amandil's chest like smoke. These are men who dandled him on their knees, who swore oaths to his father with tears in their eyes. Yet the parchment crinkles in his fist, undeniable as a slap. Why show me this? His sister's smile is bittersweet, because you still trust too easily. You see the tree and remember its symbolism. They see it and count the cost of the lumber. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of citrus from the orchards below. Somewhere in the city, a blacksmith's hammer strikes iron, each blow a reminder. Trust, like steel, must be tempered by fire. That night, the king walks the empty corridors of the palace, past tapestries depicting Numenor's golden age. Here, Tar-Amandil receives the scepter of Numenor. There, Vardamir teaches elven lore to wide-eyed scribes. Their faces blur together, a procession of rulers who never had to question whether their own blood would betray them. The door to the archives creaks open without a knock. Almarian again, this time with a bottle of pear wine and 2 cups. Drink, she orders, pouring until the liquid threatens to spill. Then decide, will you prune the rotten branches or wait for the whole tree to fall? The wine is sweet with an aftertaste of ashes. Tar-Amandil studies his sister across the flickering candlelight, searching for the girl who once smuggled frogs into his bath to make him laugh. Now her gaze holds the calculating edge of a queen in waiting. He understands suddenly why she's the one delivering these warnings, not as a sister, but as the only member of his court with no faction to appease, no lands to lose. Her loyalty is to the crown itself, not the man who wears it. The realization stings more than the wine. Dawn finds the king at the eastern balcony, watching the first ships of the day unfurl their sails in the harbor. The compromise with Ulbar bought peace, but peace has a price, one his nobles are unwilling to pay. Somewhere below, Halakar's agents are already spreading their version of events, turning concessions into cowardice. Tar-Amandil's fingers tighten around the rail. A ruler's strength, he's learning, isn't just in the battles they avoid, it's in recognizing which fights can't be won with words alone. The sea breeze carries the tang of salt and something darker, the scent of storms gathering beyond the horizon. A tempest unlike any in living memory howls out of the west, turning the sea into a churning beast that swallows 3 full squadrons of Numenor's fleet before the watchmen can light the warning beacons. By dawn, the beaches are littered with splintered hulls and the bloated bodies of sailors, still clad in their sodden uniforms. In the great temple of Armanilos, the high priest of the king's men strikes his staff against the marble floor, his voice booming over the wails of widows gathered below. The Valor have spoken. Their winds punish this kingdom's weakness, this folly of treating traitors as brothers. The crowd's murmurs thicken into a growl, fingers pointing toward the palace where Tar-Amandil stands at his balcony, watching the wreckage wash ashore. The king's hands tremble, not from fear, but from the memory of his grandfather's stories. The doom of Nmenor, the old man called it, that distant day when the gods would tire of mortal pride. But this feels less like divine wrath and more like the cruel opportunism of men who have waited years for an excuse to unsheath their knives. His counselors clamor at the chamber doors behind him, their arguments sharp as gulls' cries. Recall the eastern treaties, double the tribute to the temples, let Ulbar's head roll, and the storms will cease. Tar-Amandil closes his eyes, letting the salt spray sting his face. The easy path glimmers before him, bright as blood on snow. Sacrifice a scapegoat, reclaim the narrative. Instead, he turns on his heel, his cloak snapping like a sail in the wind. Muster the royal physicians, empty the granaries. Every man who can wield a hammer will rebuild the docks, and every noble who objects can explain their defiance to the mothers of the drowned. The scribe's stylus hesitates over the parchment. "My king," the priests say. The priests don't command the tides. Tar-Amandil interrupts, softer now. "But if this is truly the valor's judgment, let them see us kneel to feed the hungry, not to beg for mercy." In the days that follow, a different kind of storm brews in the alleyways of the capital. The king's men whisper that the white tree in the palace garden has begun to wither, its leaves curling like the fingers of a dying man. A delegation of eastern lords, fresh from their hard-won seats on the council, arrive unannounced with sacks of seed grain from their own stores, a gesture that cracks the veneer of crisis like lightning splitting a rotten mast. Ulbar himself wades into the surf alongside fishermen, hauling nets full of splintered wood to fuel the reconstruction fires. When a priest tries to bar his path, the rebel-turned lord simply laughs, tossing the man a silver coin. For your collection plate, or your silence, whichever buys more bread. By the time the last body is buried beneath a mound of white blossoms, the whispers have shifted. Not gone, never gone, but softened, like waves retreating from a battered shore. Tar-Amandil walks the rebuilt docks at twilight, running his fingers over the fresh timber. The sea is calm now, reflecting the first stars like scattered glass. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the undying lands remain, eternal and untouchable. The king exhales, watching his breath fog the cool air. Let the priests call it weakness. Let the nobles grumble. The true test of a ruler isn't in weathering the storm. It's in refusing to let the storm define who you become. The rumors slither through the streets of Armanilos like serpents in the grass, carried by merchants with wide eyes and tavern keepers who top off their patrons' cups a little too generously. That storm wasn't the valor's wrath. A fishmonger hisses to his customers, scales glittering on his fingers like misplaced stars. They say a sorcerer in the hills whistled it up with black spells, paid in eastern gold. By the time the whispers reach the palace, they've grown barbs and claws. A shadowy figure seen chanting atop the cliffs as the winds rose. A fleet of rebel ships, spotted just beyond the storm's edge, their sails untouched by the gales. Tar-Amandil's spymaster, a gaunt woman named Nuneth with ink-stained fingertips, lays the reports on the council table like a gambler revealing a losing hand. Every lead circles back to the same patch of wilderness near the old watchtower ruins, but the shepherds there won't speak, not even for silver. Her gaze flicks to the eastern lords present, their new council badges gleaming a little too brightly in the lamplight. Ulbar meets her suspicion with a snort. "If I wanted to drown your ships, woman, I'd have done it when they were full of soldiers, not grain." The king sends his agents anyway, not in uniform, but cloaked as pilgrims and peddlers. What they find isn't a sorcerer's lair, but something far older, beneath a cairn of black stones, hidden behind a waterfall that sings in a tongue no living man knows. The investigators stumble upon a shrine. The air reeks of charred flesh and something sweetly rotten, like fruit left to ferment in the sun. The walls crawl with carvings of a horned figure whose shadow stretches across mountains and seas, his outstretched hand crushing a white tree. Morgoth. The name slithers into their minds unbidden, a relic from the darkest chapters of Numenor's histories. Nuneth's voice is uncharacteristically quiet when she delivers the news to the king. They are not just worshipping the past, they are digging it up. The cultists have been trading storm lore with the mountain tribes, teaching them to twist the winds in exchange for she hesitates, pushing forward a scrap of parchment salvaged from the shrine's ashes. The sketch is crude but unmistakable. A ship, vast as a palace, its prow shaped like a gaping maw, not a vessel for sailing, a vessel for summoning. Tar-Amandil's fingers tighten around the arms of his throne. This isn't mere rebellion, it's an infection, festering in the cracks of a kingdom, already straining under the weight of its own history. The storm wasn't just an attack, it was a test. And in the silence of the palace archives, where the oldest scrolls whisper of Morgoth's chains and the first Dark Lord's hunger, the king realizes the terrifying truth. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed with swords or treaties. The cult isn't hiding in the shadows anymore. They're counting on him to bring them into the light. The first time Zigur speaks in the marketplace of Armanilos, even the seagulls fall silent. His voice isn't loud. It's everywhere, slithering between the cracks in the cobblestones, curling around the eaves of the guild halls like smoke from an unseen fire. Once a minor lord of Engineer, now draped in robes stitched from the sails of shipwrecked vessels, he spreads his arms wide as if to embrace the crowd. They call us accursed, he murmurs, and the words carry farther than a shout. But who cursed Nmenor first? The Valor, who gave us immortality's shadow yet barred us from its light. A fisherman drops his basket of eels. They writhe at Zigur's feet like living sigils. Taramandil hears the reports with a cup of untouched wine, cooling in his grip. The description of Zigur's rally makes his skin prickle, not because of the heresy, but because of the hunger in the crowd's eyes. These aren't desperate peasants or bitter rebels. They're scholars, merchants, even a few gray-haired veterans of his father's guard, all leaning forward, hanging on words that taste of rebellion and revelation. His spymaster Nuneth exhales through her teeth. He's not just railing against the gods, he's offering them an alternative, power, not prayers. When the king rides to the square where Zigur last preached, he finds not pitchforks and torches, but something far more dangerous, curiosity. A young scribe pauses in scrubbing the cult's symbol, a horned eye, within a circle from the temple steps. He said the Valor fear us, the boy mutters, avoiding Tar-Amandil's gaze. That's why they chain us here, while the elves sail west unchallenged. The words are sticky with borrowed conviction, the kind that lingers like sap on skin. The royal decree comes at dusk, read by heralds in every district. Let no man worship the shadows of the past, nor seek dominion over the gale and the wave. The path of Nmenor is written in light. The parchment is elegant, the sentiment noble, and utterly, catastrophically futile. By dawn, fresh graffiti blooms across the city. Not the horned eye this time, but a single phrase scrawled in vermilion. Why should gods fear men unless men could be gods? In the palace gardens, the white tree shivers in a wind that doesn't touch the other branches. Tar-Amandil presses his palm to its bark, feeling the pulse beneath, slower now, hesitant. He thought he was ruling a kingdom, but Zigur isn't fighting for territory or titles. He's offering something far more intoxicating, the chance to stop kneeling. The king's advisors argue for arrests, for fire and sword, but how do you battle a dream that's already taken root? The real war isn't in the streets. It's in the way the baker's daughter now hesitates before leaving her morning offering at the shrine of Uinen, in how the shipwrights whisper over their blueprints of vessels, too grand for mortal seas. That night, Tar-Amandil climbs the tower of the setting sun alone. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent as ever. Somewhere below, Zigur's followers gather in cellars and caves, their chants slithering up through the stone. The king closes his eyes. He'd built his reign on compromise, on the belief that men could be reasoned with. But what happens when they no longer want to be men at all? The scent of crushed myrtle blossoms mingles with the metallic tang of blood as Tar-Amandil staggers back from the altar, his ceremonial robes slashed open at the shoulder. The assassin's blade had been meant for his throat, would have found it, if not for Captain Barahir's gauntleted fist, intercepting the strike with a crack of bone. The square erupts into chaos, screams shredding the hymn still hanging in the air. Zigur's disciple doesn't resist as the guards tackle him. His grin is brighter than the sacrificial knife, clattering to the stones. The storm was just the beginning, he whispers, right before a guardsman's pommel silences him. For 3 days, the king refuses all audiences. The palace physicians fret over the shallow wound on his collarbone, but it's the deeper cut that troubles him. The realization that Zigur's poison has seeped even into the sacred spaces of Númenor. The would-be killer hadn't been some wild-eyed fanatic, but a junior scribe from the maritime archives, a man who'd served mint tea to the royal cartographers just last week. When Tar-Amandil finally emerges, it's not to the throne room, but to the vaulted silence of the royal archives, where the oldest scrolls exhale dust like forgotten sighs. The archivist, a wisp of a man named Lindian, doesn't flinch when the king demands the forbidden texts, the ones sealed by Tar-Miniater himself after the first shadow crept across the island. The brittle parchment crackles as it unfurls, revealing illustrations that make Lindian's hands tremble. Morgoth's disciples shaping storms with songs torn from captive winds, the black ships with sails stitched from human skin. But it's the marginalia that chills Tar-Amandil, notes in a familiar hand, his great-grandfather's, scrawled beside a diagram of chains. They mistake the shackles for strength. True power lies not in dominating the storm, but in understanding why it rages. Moonlight filters through the high windows as the king traces the faded ink. Outside, the city simmers with rumors of purges, of retribution. His advisors clamor for fire and gallows, but the parchment beneath his fingers whispers another path. Zigur's followers crave spectacle, hunger for the kind of brutal response that will martyr their fallen and swell their ranks. What if the answer isn't in matching their fury, but in stealing its fuel? Lindian startles when Tar-Amandil suddenly laughs, the sound sharp as a whetstone on steel. "Fetch me the guild rolls," the king says, brushing charcoal dust from his sleeves. Every shipwright, every mason, every apprentice hungry for work. If they want to build legends, let's give them one worth building. Dawn finds the palace scribes scratching furiously at their tablets, drafting plans for a project so audacious it makes the harbor masters gasp. Not warships, but floating gardens, vast barges to carry fresh water and seed grain to the drought-stricken east. The announcement will go public at noon, delivered not from the safety of the throne, but in the very square where blood stained the altar stones. Let Zigur whisper of stolen divinity. Tar-Amandil will offer something more intoxicating, a future. The lamplight flickers over the brittle parchment like a dying heartbeat, casting long shadows that twist into shapes almost too terrible to name. Tar-Amandil's breath stills as his fingers trace the faded script, not ink, but something darker, as if the words had been seared into the page by a hand that knew no mercy. A king shall come, crowned not in gold but in shadow. The prophecy begins, its letters writhing under his touch. He will stand at the crossroads of ruin and redemption, and his choice will echo in the bones of the world. The air in the archives grows thick, heavy with the scent of old vellum and something sharper, like lightning on the verge of striking. Almerian finds him there hours later, her footsteps silent against the stone floors. She doesn't ask what he's reading, the look on his face tells her enough. Her hand settles on his shoulder, steady as an anchor in a storm. "You're not the first ruler to fear the weight of a prophecy," she murmurs, her voice barely louder than the rustling pages. But scrolls don't dictate destiny. They warn, and warnings are gifts. The king turns the parchment toward her, revealing the final lines, the ones that make his pulse stutter. The serpent's tongue will weave a crown of lies, and the people will kneel to it, unless the faithful rise. Almerian's gaze hardens. "Zigur," she breathes. He's not just sowing dissent, he's fulfilling this. She reaches into the folds of her cloak, withdrawing a small silver pendant shaped like a star, the emblem of the faithful, worn in secret by those who still honor the old alliances with elves and valor. "We've been waiting, brother, not to serve a king, but to stand beside one who remembers what Nmenor was meant to be." Dawn finds them in the palace's oldest wing, where the tapestries show Tar-Miniater planting the white tree's first sapling. Around a table of black marble, once used to sign treaties with the elves, they gather a handful of allies. A shipwright with calloused hands and eyes that miss nothing, a priestess who tends the temple's inner sanctum, a farmer whose family has smuggled faithful refugees out of the eastern provinces for decades. Their voices are low, their plans sharper than any blade. Zigur's power thrives in shadows, the priestess says, tracing a finger along the table's vein-like cracks. Drag him into the light, and his spells will crumble like dry sand. The farmer leans forward, his sun-weathered face grim. The people are hungry, not just for bread, but for hope. Show them the truth, not with speeches, but with action. Almerian's smile is thin as a knife's edge. Then let's give them a spectacle even Zigur can't ignore. The council's plan takes shape like a ship rising from the dockyards, a gathering of all Numenor's lords, not in the stifling formality of the throne room, but beneath the spreading branches of the white tree. No armed guards, no sealed doors, just a king, a prophecy, and the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Who do you serve? Tar-Amandil watches as Almerian rehearses her role, her voice weaving through the garden like a thread of silver. She'll be the one to reveal the ancient text, to draw the parallel between Zigur's honeyed lies and the serpent's tongue foretold in the scrolls. But the true masterstroke comes from the shipwright, who's spent a lifetime reading the sea's moods. Prophecies are like tides, he grunts, polishing a piece of driftwood into a makeshift pointer. They don't tell you where to sail, just what waters to avoid. His idea is simple. Fill the council not just with lords, but with their people. Let the farmers, the weavers, the fishermen hear the words firsthand, so no twisted version can slither through the alleyways later. As the final details settle into place, Tar-Amandil walks the garden paths alone, the weight of the coming days pressing against his ribs. The white tree's leaves shimmer above him, their edges tinged with gold in the fading light. Somewhere beyond the walls, Zigur's followers are whispering, plotting, certain their victory is inevitable, but the king knows something they've forgotten. Prophecies aren't chains. They're mirrors, and sometimes all it takes to change a nation's fate is the courage to stare into the glass and choose. The council chamber hums like a beehive struck by a stone, every voice raised in argument or alarm. Zigur stands at the center of the storm, his robes the color of twilight, his words smooth as oiled silk. They tell you the valor love us, he murmurs, and the crowd leans in as if pulled by invisible strings. Then why chain us to mortality while the elves dance forever in their blessed lands? A murmur ripples through the assembly, lords clutching their signet rings, merchants exchanging glances heavy with new doubt. Even Lady Almiel's hands tremble where they rest on the table, her pearls clicking like dice about to roll. Tar-Amandil rises, his father's scepter in hand, but it's not the weight of gold that steadies him. It's the memory of Elro's final lesson, spoken on a balcony, much like the one where he first heard the sea's whispers. A king's strength lies not in his voice, but in his silence, in knowing when to let the storm exhaust itself. So he waits, lets Zigur's words hang in the air like poisoned honey, until even the cultists' own followers fidget at the stillness of their target. When the king finally speaks, his voice carries the cadence of waves against rock, not loud, but inescapable. My brother Elros chose mortality not as a chain, but as a crown. He walked with elves in the undying light, then turned his back on it to lead men into the dawn. A handful of white petals drift from the open window, catching in his hair like forgotten stars. The valor gave us Nmenor not as a prison, but as a bridge between what we were and what we might become. Zigur's smile doesn't falter, but his fingers twitch against his staff, the first crack in his polished facade. Pretty words from a king who lets his people starve while the elves hoard the light. He spreads his arms, the sleeves of his robe flaring like wings. I offer not promises, but power. The storms need not be our enemy. They could be our steeds. A young noble at the back of the chamber fists his hands in his tunic, eyes alight with reckless hunger. Then, a child's laugh, high and clear as a bell, it cuts through the tension like sunlight through fog. All heads turn to the open doors, where a girl of no more than 5 summers stands clutching a basket of bread, her mother, a baker from the lower city, hovering nervously behind her. For the tree, the girl announces, utterly oblivious to the lords gaping at her. She marches to the windowsill and deposits a loaf still warm from the oven beside the sapling planted there, its leaves trembling in the breeze. The simplicity of the gesture lands like a hammer blow. Zigur's grand promises of dominion over wind and wave suddenly seem brittle beside the scent of fresh bread and the child's unshakable certainty that this, above all else, was her duty. Murmurs shift, the crowd's energy fracturing like ice underfoot. In the shadows by the pillars, a gray-cloaked shipwright touches 2 fingers to his forehead, the old gesture of the faithful. Another echoes it, then another. Zigur's eyes narrow, sensing the tide turning. You would feed them crumbs of hope, while I offer them the feast of the gods. But his words falter when the baker woman steps forward, her flour-dusted apron, a stark contrast to the silks and jewels around her. My king, she says, curtsying awkwardly, the eastern grain shipments arrived yesterday. The children ate their fill for the first time in moons. Her voice shakes, but her gaze doesn't waver. That's power even storms can't match. The chamber holds its breath. Tar-Amandil looks from the baker's calloused hands to Zigur's manicured nails, from the child's innocent smile to the nobleman's feverish glare. The divide is no longer between East and West, rebel and loyalist. It's between those who still believe in the slow, stubborn work of healing, and those who'd rather tear the world apart for a taste of godhood. As the debate rages on, the white tree's sapling unfurls a new leaf, its edges tinged with gold. No one notices but the king, and in that tiny, stubborn act of growth, he finds the only answer that matters. The night swallows Zigur whole as he vanishes into the labyrinthine streets of Armanilos, his robes fluttering like tattered shadows behind him. The last thing the council sees is the gleam of his teeth in the torchlight, not a smile, but a snarl, the promise of a wolf, forced to retreat but far from broken. This is not the end. His voice slithers back to them, echoing oddly as if the stones themselves are repeating it. You cling to your dying tree and your crumbling oaths. But the tide always returns. Then he's gone, melted into the maze of alleys, where even the king's best trackers lose his scent at the edge of the fish markets, the stink of salt and scales masking all traces. Tar-Amandil's command rings clear in the stunned silence that follows. Find him, but no blades, no chains. Bring him back to stand before the people he's deceived. Captain Barahir's jaw tightens, every scar on his face seems to pulse with the effort of restraining his rage. Mercy, for a viper, only lets it nest deeper. He growls, fingers twitching toward the hilt of his sword. Yet the king's gaze doesn't waver. If we become what we fear, the prophecy wins either way. Dawn finds the search parties combing the cliffs and coves, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies over the rocks. But Zigur knows these shores better than any of them. Years before he ever donned the mantle of a prophet, he was a sailor's son, raised on tales of hidden caves, where the waves whisper secrets. Now he crouches in one such hollow, the damp air thick with the reek of rotting kelp, sketching maps in the sand with a stolen dagger. His audience, a handful of fishermen driven from their homes by the storm's wrath, their eyes hollow with hunger and betrayal. The king feeds you empty promises, he murmurs, pressing a crust of black bread into the youngest man's shaking hands. But I can show you how to feast on the storm itself. Back in the palace, Almerian paces like a caged falcon, her voice low and urgent. He's not just running, he's recruiting. Every hour we waste on fairness is another dozen souls he poisons. Tar-Amandil leans over the eastern maps, his fingers tracing the ragged coastline where the wild hills meet the sea. Then we give them something stronger to believe in. His plan unfolds like a battle strategy, though no swords are drawn. Grain shipments diverted to the poorest villages, royal physicians sent to tend the sick, even pardons for those who renounce Zigur's teachings publicly. But justice moves slower than hunger, and desperation has sharper teeth. By the time the king's mercy reaches the furthest hamlets, Zigur's whispers have already taken root. They say he breathes life into blighted crops, that he commands the gulls to bring him news from across the island. His followers, no longer just the starving and the bitter, but clever men with grudges and ambitious women tired of kneeling, call him the storm's mouth now. And storms, as every Númenorian knows, cannot be tried. They can only be weathered. The last report to reach the throne, comes from a shepherd boy who stumbles into the city gates, his lips cracked with thirst. He's seen Zigur standing atop the ruins of the western watchtower, arms outstretched as the clouds churn above him like a cauldron. He wasn't running, the boy gasps. Clutching the waterskin, a guard presses into his hands. He was waiting. Tar-Amandil walks to the balcony, the white trees sapling shivering in its pot beside him. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the first thunder growls. Not a threat, a challenge. The first fires bloom along the eastern coast like poisoned flowers, their smoke staining the dawn the color of old bruises. Zigur's storm callers strike not at soldiers, but at symbols, burning storehouses stamped with the royal crest, toppling statues of Tar-Amandil with ropes slicked in fish oil. A fisherman's widow, her face streaked with soot and tears, clutches the king's sleeve as he surveys the wreckage of her village. They said the white tree drinks the blood of children, she whispers, her voice raw from screaming. That you bargain with elves for longer life, while we starve. Tar-Amandil's hands ache to fists at his sides. The lies slither faster than truth can chase them. Back in Armanilos, the council chamber echoes with the clash of steel and shouting. Lord Halakar slams a charred chunk of wood onto the table, all that remains of a schoolhouse in Hjornest. Enough mercy. Let the Eastern Lords prove their loyalty with steel, or hang beside their pet sorcerer. Even Lady Almiel, ever the voice of restraint, folds her hands tight around her pearl necklace as if it's the last tether to her patience. They target the young and the helpless now. What comes next? Poison in the wells, daggers in the night. The king retreats to the palace gardens, where the white tree's leaves tremble in the evening breeze. Kneeling beneath its branches, he presses his forehead to the earth, still damp from the gardener's care. The roots hum against his skin, a vibration older than kings or crowns. He doesn't ask for a sign. He's too weary for theatrics. Only silence, only the terrible weight of choice, and then a single petal drifts down, catching on his eyelash like a kiss. Not white, as all the others, but edged in gold, the color of the sunlight that gilds the undying lands at dawn. The breath leaves his lungs in a rush. He'd spent so long fearing the prophecy's shadow, he'd forgotten its light. Unless the faithful rise, dawn finds him on the steps of the temple, his crown replaced by a simple circlet of silver. The crowd gathered below murmurs as he raises not a sword, but a sapling, a cutting from the white tree, its roots cradled in a basket, woven by the very fisherfolk Zigur's men had terrorized. You want a king who speaks with storms. His voice carries over the square, clear as a bell. I offer you one who plants trees. The gamble is breathtaking in its simplicity. Zigur thrives on fear, on the spectacle of conflict. So Tar-Amandil strips him of both. No armies will march today. No prisoners will scream in the dungeons. Only a king walking unarmed into the heart of the storm, a sapling in his hands and the truth on his tongue. The road east stretches before him, dusty and treacherous. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Zigur waits, his whispers already coiling through the hills. But for the first time in months, the weight on Tar-Amandil's shoulders feels less like a burden and more like wings. The wind howls across the sacred slopes of Minaltarma, tearing at cloaks and whipping hair into wild tangles as Tar-Amandil climbs the final steps to the summit. Zigur stands silhouetted against the bleeding sunset, his robes billowing like storm clouds given form. Below them, the sea churns a mirror to the fury in the sorcerer's eyes. Still playing the gardener, King, Zigur's laughter is a blade wrapped in silk. You bring a sapling to a battlefield. He gestures to the white trees, cutting cradled in Tar-Amandil's arms, its leaves trembling in the gale. The king sets the sapling down carefully, anchoring its roots between two weathered stones. When he straightens, his hands are empty. "This was never a battle," he says, his voice cutting through the wind. "Only a choice, one you still have time to unmake." The words hang between them, fragile as the first frost. Zigur's smile curdles. "You think exile will cleanse me? That I'll wander the earth repenting while you polish your myth?" He steps closer, the air around him crackling with the scent of ozone and something darker. Burnt sugar, rotting parchment. Mercy is the coward's weapon. You wield it because you lack the strength to do what's necessary. Taramandil doesn't flinch, and what is necessary? Drowning Nmenor in blood to prove you're fit to rule it. He spreads his hands, palms upturned. You could have been a healer, a teacher. The people followed you because they were hungry, not because they wanted storms. For a heartbeat, something flickers in Zigur's face, not doubt, but the shadow of it. Then it's gone, swallowed by the old, familiar rage. They'll remember me as the one who dared. He snarls, lunging forward with a dagger drawn from nowhere, its edge glinting green as poisoned glass. The blade never finds its mark. A gust, unlike any natural wind, roars across the peak, so sudden and fierce it knocks Zigur sideways. His cry is lost in the thunderous snap of fabric as his robes tangle around him. One heel skids on loose scree, then nothing. The sorcerer teeters for an impossible instant at the cliff's edge, arms wheeling, eyes wide with something beyond fury. Beyond fear, recognition, perhaps, of the hand that pushed back. Then he's gone. The silence that follows is thicker than the sea mist rising below. Tar-Amandil sinks to his knees beside the sapling, his fingers brushing its leaves as if to reassure himself it's real. The wind has stilled to a whisper, carrying only the distant cries of gulls and the sigh of waves far beneath the cliffs. No victory chant rises from his lips. No triumphant decree, only a slow exhale, heavy with the weight of what was lost and what might yet grow. Down in the valleys, the rebel camps dissolve like salt in water. Men who moments earlier were sharpening swords now clutch their amulets of the horned eye, staring at the mountain where their prophet stood. Some flee into the hills. Others drop to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the earth, as if they can still beg forgiveness from the roots beneath their feet. By nightfall, the first envoys arrive at the palace gates, not with weapons, but with baskets of olive branches and sacks of barley from their own dwindling stores. The baker's daughter, grown thin from months of rationing, places a loaf of bread at the guard's feet. For the king, she murmurs, and the tree, high above, the white tree's sapling catches the moonlight, its golden-edged leaves trembling in the breeze. Not with fear, with promise. Peace settles over Nmenor like morning, mist on the harbor, soft, fragile, but undeniably present. The streets of Armanilos no longer echo with the crackle of torches or the murmurs of rebellion, but Tar-Amandil knows better than to mistake quiet for contentment. The scars run deep, not just in the charred timbers of rebuilt villages, but in the way mothers still hush their children at the mention of storms. how fishermen glance over their shoulders when the gulls cry too sharply. Healing, the king learns, is not the absence of wounds, but the tending of them. His days become a tapestry of small, deliberate stitches, restoring trade routes severed by suspicion, sitting in the humble homes of Eastern weavers who once cursed his name, listening as they spin flax and grievances alike. The white tree's sapling, now transplanted to the central square of every major town, becomes more than a symbol, it's a silent witness to the slow return of trust. Children hang ribbons from its branches, each knot a whispered hope. Farmers leave offerings of the first harvest at its roots, a tradition older than the divisions Zigur exploited. Yet the sea never stops whispering. On evenings when the western horizon burns gold, Tar-Amandil walks the cliffs alone, the salt wind tugging at his cloak like an insistent child. The undying lands still glow just beyond sight, a constant reminder of the choice his ancestor made, and the one he himself must live with, day after mortal day. But where once that distance ached like a fresh wound, now it feels like a lesson. The elves may sail unchallenged to shores untouched by time, but Numenor's strength was never in chasing eternity. It's in the baker who teaches her daughter to knead dough while reciting the names of every king back to Elrose, in the shipwright who carves the white tree's likeness into every prow, so even the waves will remember. The final scroll he adds to the royal archives is not a chronicle of battles or decrees, but a simple map, not of borders or armies, but of scars. Here, the valley where Zigur's followers surrendered their daggers to plant orchards. There, the cliffside shrine where fishermen now leave offerings to you, Einan, not out of fear, but gratitude. And at the center, Armanilos, where the original white tree stretches its branches over a courtyard once stained with blood, now filled with the laughter of children who have never known war. When the king climbs the tower of the setting sun one last time, his hair silvered by years and his hands roughened by reins instead of scepters, the horizon is the same as it ever was, endless, unknowable. But the ache in his chest has changed. No longer the sharp pull of longing, but the steady warmth of a hearth fire tended through the night. He turns away not with resignation, but with quiet certainty. The sea will always call, and he will always choose to stay.